today comes from one of Marcus Borg's last books. It's called The God We Never Knew. Shaping and reshaping the imagination is one of the central functions of the public reading of Scripture as sacred story. These are the stories of our tribe. They're also stories about God and us. As our stories, they shape our sense of what it means to be part of this tradition, not some other tradition. As stories about God and us, they shape our images of reality, of life, and of ourselves. Understood this way, Scripture as sacred story is not something to be believed in as a means to be believed in, but a means for mediating the sacred. That is, Scripture is not to be treated as an object of belief, but is to be lived within. It becomes a lens through which we see God, life, and ourselves.
Let's cross over to the other shore. Leaving the crowd behind, they took Jesus in the boat in which he was sitting. There were other boats with them. Then a fierce gale arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so much that it was almost swamped. But Jesus was in the stern through it all, sound asleep on a cushion. They woke him up and said, "Teacher, doesn't it matter to you that we're going down?" Jesus awoke, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Quiet, be calm." And the wind dropped, and everything was perfectly calm. Jesus then said to the disciples, "Why were you so frightened? Have you no faith?" But they became filled with fear and said to one another, "Who is this, whom even the wind and sea obey?"
Thanks, Teresa. Would you pray with me?
Yeah.
Holy God, help us to feel your presence in the breeze this morning. To know that we are never alone. To have faith even when it seems hopeless. To know peace inside even when the world is crazy. And may the words of my mouth and meditations of each of our hearts be filled with that peace and your wisdom. So I have enjoyed preaching on different themes for about the last year or so. It's given me an opportunity to talk about different ideas and to use different scripture that we normally wouldn't hear in our standard prescribed lectionary cycle. Having said that, I'm actually going to go back to the lectionary cycle for a little while, and we're going to spend some time in the Gospel of Mark from now probably until about Advent. I'm hoping that doing it for this length of time will give us some continuity as we follow the stories through the Gospel of Mark and give us a sense of the flow of Jesus' life and specifically ministry for a while. So before I get into our reading for this morning, let me give you a little bit of background on the Gospel of Mark. Because it adds color and it adds depth, as opposed to sort of being a flat, non-dimensional, black and white kind of book. If we put it in its historical, critical context, it's much richer and it makes a whole lot more sense, and we see things more from the author's perspective, perhaps find messages that we wouldn't see otherwise if we just took it at face value. So the Gospel of Mark is the first narrative written about Jesus. You know what a narrative, right? It's a story. It's the first chronological attempt to try and explain his life and ministry in story form. Sure, we had the letters from Paul, and we'll get back to Paul in a minute, and we had some, the Q source, which was probably sayings and maybe parables of Jesus. Mark is the first one to put it in narrative form, and this is like the year 70. So we're talking 40 years-ish after Jesus died. Okay. In the year 70, we find ourselves in the midst of, very least, the end of war and conflict. In the year 66, the Jews revolted against Rome. And they were doing great for a while. The revolutionaries were succeeding, they were winning the war, and then Rome sent in a bunch of battalions. And it's not good when you've got a whole bunch of army from Rome coming in. It actually took a little while, but by about the year 70, Rome had captured Jerusalem, had destroyed the city, had destroyed the temple, and had changed the lives of the Jews forever. Destroying the temple was something they thought was absolutely impossible. It was incomprehensible for anybody to destroy the temple. The temple wasn't just like, our church building down the street here. The temple was huge, and it wasn't just one building. It was like a whole bunch of buildings and courtyards and a really big wall. So in one place this wall was 300 feet high. I don't know how they did that without a crane, frankly. Some of the bricks in these walls were 40 feet long, 15 feet deep, 7 feet high, and weighed 200 tons. So you've got this monstrosity of a temple compound. And the Jews thought God lived in there. Certainly if God's living in there, and we've got these huge walls, who on earth can destroy it? But they did. It sort of reminds me of the Twin Towers coming down. That was incomprehensible to us, that something like that could happen. And it colored the way we looked at everything afterwards. Certainly in the year or two immediately following, it colored our writing and our TV and our thought and our news. It colored how we looked at the world, how we looked at God, how we looked at other people who lived in the world, how we understood our religion. It colored everything. The same thing had to have been true of the Jews who just had their city wiped out, their sacred space, their temple wiped out. Thousands and thousands of people died in that conflict. Whoever was left had their life irrevocably damaged and changed. Their understanding of God and religion changed. Their understanding of themselves and one another changed. So in the midst of all of that, if you can imagine that, in the midst of all of that, Mark is writing this narrative about Jesus. Why now? It seems to me that Mark is writing for homes, to give people something to hang on to. And it explains his emphasis on Jesus as Messiah, not just as somebody who lived, at the beginning of the century, but someone who was going to come back and make things right, who was going to bring peace and harmony. Mark, and by the way, we don't necessarily know that Mark is really Mark. None of the Gospels actually had names. None of them were signed. None of them were started with, according to the Gospel of Mark. they weren't given names until the 2nd century when there were a bunch of gospels floating around and people had to distinguish them from one another. So when I say Mark, who knows what the name is, but work with it. So Mark is trying to give people something. Makes sense? Pauline letters. We all know Paul, the Apostle Paul, right? He was the first one to start setting up house churches in the Mediterranean, and he probably started that around the year 45. We have 7 authentic letters from Paul that date between the years like 50 and 60. Remember, Mark's 70, so this is 20 to 30 years earlier than Mark. And Paul set up these house churches, and then he wrote letters back to them to mediate conflict and to sort of keep them going, keep them interested, help them understand Jesus a little better, give them some theology, give them some rules in some cases. But what's interesting is we hop back to Mark, and we're jumping into Mark at the point of Jesus calming the storm. In the 7 authentic letters of Paul, which include 1 Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Romans, Philippians, Philemon. Did I say Galatians? Okay, there's 7 anyways. None of those make any reference to any miracles or healings by Jesus. Which is just kind of interesting, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because if Paul's trying to convince people to come to his house churches and stay in his house churches, he wants them to follow and be a part of this Jesus movement. If I was Paul, and I had that kind of knowledge and insight or stories of Jesus, I'd be using it. But we don't have miracle stories of Jesus until Mark. So again, we have to ask ourselves, why? Scholars suggest that it's to give impact or weight to the concept of Jesus as a Messiah. He needed some corroboration, some proof somehow that Jesus really was who Mark and Paul said he was, and that he was going to come back and do something great. Many of the miracle stories are actually an echo of Old Testament stories. So the story that Teresa read for us today is an echo of Psalm 107, where God calms the storm. It's just sort of been translated into Mark's language and Mark's story. You know what? Mark didn't care if it was truth or not, if it was fact or not. That wasn't even a thing for them. They understood story as being able to inspire and to motivate and to challenge and to heal and to help. That's all it was about. It didn't matter if the story was factual or not. So all of this leaves us with the challenge of how do we understand those stories, if not as a literal reading, then how do we understand it as a deeper than literal meaning? What's underneath it? What's the message for it? What's the truth with a capital T that we can glean from it to help us with our lives right now? So let's talk about the story that Teresa read of Jesus calming the storm. Taken literally, I don't know that it has much to say to us. Okay, Jesus and the disciples are in a boat. They're crossing the Sea of Galilee, really big sea, by the way. The storm whips up. The disciples freak out. Jesus is nice and comfy on a cushion in the back of the boat, and he's asleep. They go and wake him up. He calms the storm. He says, "Do you not have faith?" And we're done. If we leave it there, what does it say for us now? So we need to look at it in a deeper than literal meaning. We need to look at it in a metaphorical reading, to look at a deeper message that Mark got across. So if we look at it that way, help me flesh this out. Who does Jesus represent in this? In a deeper than literal meaning, in a way that can make sense for us today. Who might Jesus represent? Our courage. So a part of ourselves that gets us through. Is that what you're echoing, Sharon? What else? Could be the divine. Absolutely. What else? Hope. Maybe, Clarice, coming from your spot this week. All of those people that are supportive and encouraging. Those people who bring us calm and steadiness in life. Because certainly that's Jesus' role in the stories. He brought calm, he brought steadiness, he brought faith, he brought hope. So who are the disciples? Our fears. Us. When we're sort of freaked out, get on that hamster wheel of worry and concern and, oh my gosh, now what? Yeah. What about the storm? The chaos of life. Which includes, anybody? Conflict, death, depression. Everything is out of control. Health problems, car problems, boxes that don't fit in car problems, our kids, our parents, our jobs, our homes. I don't know why when one appliance goes, they all go. At least three. All of that chaos in life signified by the storms. So I also think, as I was reading this, that the Sea of Galilee also represents something. It wasn't just that they were going out, like 100 yards and they were going fishing. Right? They were actually getting in at one point and crossing to the other side. It seems to me that it signifies a journey. That it signifies movement from one place to another. Maybe from one point in your life to another, from one attitude to another, from one perspective or one stage in life to another. So I think there's a lot that's in there. And when I start to flesh it out like that, it makes more sense to me. Then I can connect to it. Then I see myself in the story. And I see myself in that. That's not even an airplane. I don't even know what that is. It's like a motorized scooter in the air or something. So I see myself in the script. Have you ever been in this place? Things start to go wrong in life where you're experiencing the chaos in life, whatever it is, and you start to lose your head about it a little bit. You start to go on and on and on in your head about what could go wrong, or what I'm going to lose, or the what-ifs and the could-haves and the should-haves, and you go on and you start to work yourself up, right? Do you ever do this? Is it just me? It's just me. All right, then just pretend you're with me on this for a second. You work yourself up, and you get to a point where, there's that part of you that is connected to the divine. There's that part of you that, on your good days, you've got a lot of faith, you've got a lot of calm, you've got a lot of peace. Well, that part of you is like, asleep in the back of the boat at the moment, right? MIA, maybe your other crazy, fearful voices are shouting so loud that you can't even hear the voice of calm and peace that is within you. And so you're caught up in this drama. And you know what you'd really like? You'd really like other people to be caught up in your drama too. So you call the people that you know will get on your side with the drama. And you go, can you believe all of this is happening? My brother did so-and-so, and this is going on. And they're like, oh, how dare they? And they get all caught up in your drama with you. Those are the disciples. disciples. They're all there. Look at this storm. The water's coming in. Do you notice none of them are bailing? They're all just caught up in getting worked up about the storm. And they're like, and where is that leader of ours? He's in the back. They're not even looking to him for help. They just want him caught up in their drama. Jesus, get up! Don't you care about us at all? Come on! Look at the storm. The water's coming in. We're about to drown. And he looks up. And he stands up. And it's kind of like, the kids that are fighting when you're napping and they come in and they try and get you caught up in who did what. And you go, shut up! So he quiets the storm. And I'm hoping he goes back to sleep. But it's those people in our lives, or the Spirit in our life, that eventually gets through to us, that calms us back down and says, you're gonna get it. Hang on to your faith. Because it's a rough ride, rough seas ahead, but we're gonna make it to the other shore. And we're gonna make it there together. It's a story about a woman named Louisa, who was a very highly skilled AIDS doctor. She kept a picture of her grandmother in her house. And she spent a few minutes in front of that picture every morning before she went to work. And her grandmother was a very wise Italian-born woman who held her family close. And Louisa tells a story about when she was about 5, and her kitty died in an accident. And she'd never had any experience with death before, and she was distraught, devastated by the death of this kitty. And her parents, kind of said, oh, honey, don't be sad. Kitty's going to be in heaven with God. And, well, Louisa wasn't buying it, wasn't comforting her at all. She prayed to God. God didn't bring the kitty back. So she finally went to her grandmother, and she said, why? Why? And her grandmother pulled her up on her lap and said, do you remember your grandpa? And her grandpa had died a while ago, but she remembered her grandpa. And her grandma said, when he died, I prayed to God too. And God didn't bring him back again. And I don't know why. At which point, Louisa just put her head on her grandma's shoulder and just sobbed and sobbed. And she said when she could finally look up at her grandma again, she saw that her grandma was crying too. She said her grandma didn't have the answers for her that day. But she had managed to do what none of the other words and platitudes had been able to do, which was to help her not feel lonely anymore. To help her feel like she could go on. So her grandma was a lap. She said, when she's there with her AIDS patients, that's what she wants to be, is a lap. A place that they can be where whatever they have to go through, for however long they have to go through it, they know that they have someone who's there with them and for them, a place of safety and a place of comfort to help them get through. So we all go through storms in life. It's life. We can't get away with not doing that. The challenge sometimes, I think, is to recognize when we're caught up in our drama and wanting to catch other people up in our drama. And to maybe take a deep breath. And instead of looking for those folks that will feed our drama, look for those folks who will be a lap. Listen for the spirit that blows in the wind, the still small voice that's within, the one that calms us, that says you're not alone, that says we're going to get to the other side of this crazy sea together. Sometimes it's another person. Sometimes it's just our pet who sits there and is quiet and generous with us. Sometimes it's the sunshine that brings perspective. Wherever it is, we are not alone. And sometimes we even get to be a lamp for someone else. We get to be that calm, still, safe place where we companion someone else through the storm. To me, that's the message in that miracle story. That there are people, perhaps it's the modern day miracle, people who help us get through our storms in ways we can help others get through theirs. Amen.